At 2:30 p.m. local time, the calm surface of the South China Sea rippled with tension. Overhead, the rhythmic thump of rotor blades marked the presence of one of the U.S. Navy's most capable workhorses, the MH-60R Seahawk. To most people, it looked like just another helicopter, but appearances deceive. This Seahawk wasn't sightseeing, it was hunting. Beneath the waves lurked a Chinese Type 039 diesel-electric submarine. For nearly 48 hours, they'd been running on battery power, desperately waiting for a chance to snorkel, recharge, and slip back into the shadows. But diesel submarines are like people holding their breath. Eventually, you must surface. And when you do, the Americans are waiting. On this day, they weren't just waiting. They were watching, with a Seahawk dipping its sonar, listening to every creak and every cavitation bubble of that submarine below. Inside Xiamen Air Base, a red phone rang. A Chinese pilot, strapped into a Z-10 attack helicopter, was given orders that sounded simple. Go scare off the Americans. Within minutes, the Z-10 thundered skyward. Its angular frame, built with leftover Russian blueprints from the 1990s, tried hard to look intimidating. A Chinese copy of the American Apache. But intimidation is easy when you're not facing the U.S. Navy. The Z-10 carried a 23mm cannon, rocket pods, and air-to-air missiles. On paper, it looked lethal, but paper can't hide flaws. Its engines ran hot, its avionics lagged behind modern standards, and worst of all, its sensors had never faced the nightmare of American electronic warfare. Still, the pilot believed his mission was straightforward. Push the Seahawk out, show dominance, send a message. What he didn't know was that this mission wouldn't just test him. It would expose China's secrets to the very military they feared most. 18 minutes later, radar on the Seahawk picked up a faint signal approaching fast. Seconds after, the crew spotted a dark silhouette slicing across the sky. The Z-10 had arrived. At 2:48 p.m., the Chinese pilot made his first aggressive move, banking sharply across the Seahawk's nose at just 500 meters. The Seahawk's three-person crew, 2 pilots, and 1 sensor operator barely flinched. Over the radio, a warning crackled in broken English. "Foreign military aircraft. You are approaching Chinese territorial waters. Alter your course immediately." The Americans knew better. They were 50 nautical miles from any Chinese claimed territory, well within international airspace. To Washington, they had every legal right to be there. To Beijing, this was an insult. The Seahawk held its course. The Z-10 wasn't impressed. The Chinese pilot wanted to show he meant business. He popped 2 flares dangerously close to the Seahawk, streaking bright fireballs across the sky. Then he pulled his nose down, pointing his 23mm cannon squarely at the American helicopter. For a few tense seconds, his fire control radar hummed. A steady tone filled his headset. Radar lock confirmed. In his mind, he had the Seahawk dead to rights. In reality, he had just stepped into a trap, because while he thought he was attacking, the Seahawk's ALQ-210 electronic support measures pod was recording every single emission from the Z-10, its radar frequencies, its pulse repetition intervals, its exact targeting methods. Every flicker of the Chinese radar was being vacuumed into American memory banks, turning the so-called attack into an intelligence harvest. Inside the Seahawk, there was no panic, no desperate maneuvering, no evasive spirals. Instead, the crew calmly dropped their sonar again, pointing directly at the submarine below. The message was deliberate. "We feel for your friend down there." Panic rippled under the waves. The Chinese submarine, realizing it was still being tracked despite the helicopter distraction, made a crash dive. The sudden move filled the ocean with noise. Cavitation bubbles, hull creaks, and pressure pops that could be heard across the entire U.S. carrier strike group. In submarine warfare, noise equals death, and the Z-10 had just made his own submarine easier to kill, but the real humiliation was still to come. 3 minutes later, the situation shifted. From high above, an EA-18G Growler, the U.S. Navy's dedicated electronic warfare aircraft, flipped a switch. Its ALQ-99 jamming pod screamed to life. Beams of electromagnetic energy surged toward the Z-10. In an instant, the Chinese pilot's radar went blind. The Seahawk didn't just disappear, it multiplied. His screen now showed 12 ghost helicopters, some flying backward, others teleporting, one even appearing inside his own cockpit. He had locked onto nothing. This was the nightmare of facing modern American jamming. The Growler didn't just block signals, it rewrote reality. As if blindness wasn't enough, the Chinese pilot's threat warning system lit up with something far worse: the signature of the U.S. Navy's Aegis radar system. The entire carrier strike group had locked onto him. It was as if 1,000 invisible eyes had suddenly turned his way. Far off the horizon, FA-18 Super Hornets began launching from the deck of the carrier, not to engage, but to remind him that the Seahawk wasn't alone. It had the weight of the entire U.S. Pacific Fleet behind it. Inside the Z-10 cockpit, sweat beaded on the pilot's forehead. What started as a simple intimidation run was turning into the most humiliating moment of his career. By 3:10 p.m., nearly 40 minutes into the encounter, the Z-10 pilot had tried everything. He switched radar frequencies. He increased power. He even rebooted his system mid-flight. Nothing worked. The jamming always moved faster, smarter, deadlier. Meanwhile, the Seahawk crew remained so calm, one analyst later joked they were probably discussing lunch plans over the intercom because they knew what the Chinese didn't. Every second this dragged on, the US was building a library of intelligence. The Seahawk wasn't just recording radar emissions. Its infrared sensors were capturing the Z-10's thermal profile, hotspots on the exhaust, rotor transmission, engine housings. Its acoustic sensors picked up unique rotor harmonics, essentially the helicopter's fingerprint, and every failed radar lock attempt was logged, giving U.S. engineers a playbook of exactly how Chinese attack helicopters tried to engage. In short, the Z-10 wasn't attacking, it was teaching America how to kill it. But the story doesn't end there, because at this point, the Chinese pilot, humiliated, frustrated, and out of options, pushed his helicopter into reckless maneuvers that nearly tore his machine apart. And the American response to that reckless gamble was far more disturbing than he ever expected. By 3:20 p.m., nearly an hour into the confrontation, the Chinese Z-10 pilot realized his intimidation was failing. The Seahawk wasn't retreating. The submarine below was still being tracked, and now his own systems were glitching under the relentless electronic assault. In desperation, he did the only thing left in his playbook: get close. The Z-10 closed the gap to just 500 meters, close enough for the Seahawk crew to see his face through the canopy. The Chinese helicopter began lunging left and right, pitching up and down, rolling aggressively, desperate to force the Seahawk into a defensive maneuver. But this wasn't a dogfight. This was humiliation. Every wild turn bled speed. Every high G pitch strained the Z-10's airframe. Warnings lit his console like a Christmas tree. The Seahawk? It flew steady, unfazed, watching. Now at knife fight range, the Chinese pilot angled his nose coming forward, letting the American crew see the threat. But here's the problem. The Z-10's 23mm cannon is designed to strafe ground targets. Against a maneuvering helicopter at this range, accuracy would be laughable. The Seahawk's GAU 21.50 caliber machine gun, on the other hand, outranges the Z-10's cannon with armor-piercing incendiary rounds. One burst could have shredded the Z-10's cabin like tissue paper. The Seahawk's door gunner didn't fire. He didn't need to. Simply swiveling the heavy machine gun toward the Z-10 sent a message crystal clear: pull the trigger and you don't go home. The Chinese pilot hesitated. His mission had been to intimidate. But in this moment, he knew he was the one being measured. At 3:32 p.m., after 62 minutes of fruitless aggression, the Z-10's radar warning receiver went berserk. New signals flooded his cockpit. Multiple fire control radars had locked onto him, not just from the Seahawk, not just from the Growler, but from somewhere far larger. He looked down at the sea and his heart dropped. On the horizon, the USS Ronald Reagan Carrier Strike Group was now fully active. Aegis destroyers had rotated their arrays directly at him. In naval warfare terms, this was the equivalent of a death sentence. Even though no missile was fired, the implication was unmistakable. One wrong move, and his helicopter wouldn't last 10 seconds. The hunter had become the hunted. Here's the detail that made the encounter far more disturbing than the Chinese ever expected. While the Seahawk crew remained calm, their electronic warfare systems were busy doing something far more dangerous than jamming. They were mapping vulnerabilities. Every time the Z-10 pilot tried to re-establish radar lock, his radar's internal codes were being logged. Every time he attempted a laser designation, his optical systems were being profiled. The Americans weren't just defending, they were quietly writing a kill manual for every Z-10 in existence. Thermal imaging showed the engine hotspots. Acoustic sensors mapped the sound of stressed rotor blades. Frequency sweeps identified exactly which bands to jam to blind the Z-10 completely. In less than 72 minutes, the US had collected enough data to compromise not just this helicopter, but an entire generation of Chinese attack aviation. And the Chinese didn't even realize it. By 3:42 p.m., the Z-10 pilot had exhausted every trick. His helicopter was overheating, hydraulic pressure was dropping, the engines were running at 105% continuous power, glowing like a beacon in infrared. The Seahawk's crew dropped their sonar one final time. The submarine below, still being tracked, panicked again, turning sharply, making even more noise. The message was devastatingly clear. You failed. Your submarine is still ours. The Chinese pilot now faced an impossible choice: keep pushing and risk being shot down, or retreat, admitting total failure. For Beijing, either option was humiliating. Finally, the Seahawk transmitted over open frequencies with icy professionalism. Chinese military aircraft. This is United States Navy aircraft, operating in international airspace in accordance with international law. We will maintain course and altitude translation. You can bark all you want. We're not moving. But behind that calm transmission was something darker. Because as the Seahawk spoke, the carrier strike group's radars painted the Z-10 with fire control precision. It wasn't just a warning, it was a statement. We know exactly how to kill you. And now, we know exactly how to kill every Z-10 you'll ever send. At 3:45 p.m., the Z-10 finally broke off. His engine strained as he banked east, retreating toward the coast. But the damage was done. In just over an hour, the U.S. Navy had exposed the weaknesses of China's premier attack helicopter, forced the Chinese submarine into noisy, compromising maneuvers, collected a treasure trove of intelligence that would shape future warfare, and most importantly, demonstrated full-spectrum dominance: air, sea, and electronic. The Z-10 pilot may have returned to base alive, but his mission was a failure. Worse than that, it had handed the U.S. insights Beijing had fought for decades to keep hidden. The encounter wasn't just a clash of helicopters, it was a live demonstration of modern warfare's true battlefield: the electromagnetic spectrum. China tried to show muscle. Instead, it exposed its secrets. America didn't need to fire a shot. Instead, it jammed, recorded, mapped, and humiliated. And in doing so, it quietly secured an advantage that could decide future conflicts. For Beijing, the lesson was bitter. Every aggressive move risks revealing more than it achieves. For Washington, the takeaway was priceless. When China attacks, we don't just defend. We learn. And we make sure the next time the fight ends before it even begins. So what do you think? Did the Chinese pilot cross the line by aiming his weapons at a U.S. Navy helicopter? Or was this just plastering gone wrong? Tell me in the comments. Should the U.S. have fired back immediately, yes or no? If you found this story gripping, hit the like button to support the channel, subscribe for more frontline military analysis, and ring the bell so you never miss the next crisis update. Because as today's encounter proved, wars aren't always fought with missiles and bombs. Sometimes they're won with patience, technology, and the calm confidence of knowing you're untouchable. This was Military Crises, and the story doesn't end here. Stay tuned.